people are going to disagree. People are going to get heated and things like that. But when this man, and I don't know what led up to it, but when this man got in the face of this young woman, young African-American woman in Whitefish, it really was just like way over the line. But what was remarkable was her response. How and she stood up to this guy, who's a large guy, by the way, and she stood up to him and held firm and looked him right in the eye. Anyway, very cool story that went viral. Samantha Francine, that young woman, now with us here on Montana Talk. Samantha, thanks for joining us this morning.
Thank you for having me.
I know you got to work, so we appreciate you joining us in the earlier morning hours of the show and taking some time out for us here. Tell us a little bit about your background. I had seen this story initially because it had kind of gone viral already, but then I had seen some friends share it on Facebook, and turns out that they go to church with your parents, and so you kind of grew up in the Flathead, right?
I grew up in Whitefish. I went through the school district here. This is my home. Like I said, I grew up in the Whitefish Assembly of God Church. My parents, again, are in Camas Church. They're in the community. My brothers were raised here. I mean, this is my hometown.
And did I see your folks work at Chick-fil-A, or one of your parents work at Chick-fil-A, something like that?
Yeah, my dad works at Chick-fil-A, yeah.
We love Chick-fil-A. So I think the only one in Montana is there in the Flathead. And yeah. Well, I guess talk about just first your experience, because a lot of us, we weren't there. All we know is what we see in the video, and it's like, this guy clearly crossed the line. But you're there, you're taking part in the Black Lives Matter protest. And from what we see in the video, this guy gets in the middle of all the protesters and starts shouting in their faces, "Oh yeah, Black Lives Matter, well, F you," and starts screaming at people. And like I say, we don't know what led up to that. But when he gets in your face in particular, I thought, man, he's lucky there weren't some Second Amendment folks there, because he would have had people in his face real fast.
Right. Well, he had been driving around the block at that point before that happened. So he'd already been angry. He was driving around yelling at the protesters, yelling profanities. And then, we were just peacefully protesting. There were people that weren't happy with what we were doing. And though I don't quite understand that, that's their right. However, when I heard the commotion behind me, we had a lot of teenagers there, a lot of young people. And so, when we heard what was going on, I kind of turned around and saw this man yelling. And so we kind of just moved, the group kind of stood firm and kind of was watching what's happening. And as soon as he saw me, he came right up and started yelling in my face, screaming in my face. And in that moment, and I guess I should give you a little backstory. The parents that you're talking about are the parents that adopted me after I turned 11. My biological father passed away when I was 16 years old. He was a white man. We were raised in Montana, but he was from the city of Chicago. And he always raised us to, he just always told us we were going to be treated different. He always told us that because of our skin color, some people weren't going to treat us as equals. And so one of the things he used to tell my brothers and I as children was that no matter who or what the threat is, make sure that they have to look you in the eye. So they have to acknowledge that you're human. And so in that moment, I had my sunglasses on. This man is yelling at me. And in that moment, I just kind of heard those words in my heart and my head. And so I just lifted up my glasses so that man, that big, yelly, screaming man, had to look at me and see me. And in that moment, they kind of, he said a few more words and then decided that he was going to go attack the younger kids. And at that point, the police kind of came through and, it de-escalated pretty quickly.
Yeah, and that's such a powerful statement that you heard your father's own words, and then to stand your ground in that moment really is so powerful. What's the reaction been like? Because I know you've been on CNN, you've been on CBS Morning News, really has gone viral.
Yeah, my life changed overnight, but it's been so powerful for me. I've been an African-American woman in this community. I've lived in other states and was surrounded by people of color in those states. So it was, I didn't have the same kind of adversity that I've always had here. And so coming home, I've been trying to find my voice as an African-American woman. And with this incident, it's really given me a voice. And most of the reaction has been so positive. I've received so much love from around the world, literally, just with support and telling me about their children and how they, I'm an example. And, I want to be that. I want to have purpose in my life. Unfortunately, there are the people who, insist on telling me that, I'm getting paid to do this, or this was, the Black girl photo op, or, racism isn't real. So, there is the 10% hundreds of people that I'm talking to that have something negative to say, but most of the reaction has been so awesome and so powerful, and I'm really, really thankful for this experience.
Samantha, first, I guess talk about why you felt it was so important to be at the protest in Whitefish.
Right. So I really felt, I hadn't gone the first 2 days. I've been every day since. But a group of teenagers started it. But when all of this started, it was Ahmaud Arbery, Breonna Taylor, and then George Floyd, kind of like boom, boom, boom. I've always suppressed my feelings about that because as an African-American woman, that happens in the African-American community, and it causes a lot of emotions. However, living in a predominantly white town, there's not a lot of people to go to express how that makes you feel. So when I found out that the protests were happening, I felt it was my responsibility as a woman of color to be there, to stand up for my brothers and sisters of color. And because Whitefish is predominantly white, I think it was especially important to be there as a woman of color. The Black Lives Matter movement and the people of color wanting to make change, we need to be at the forefront of that. We do need people to support us, but we need to be the ones leading that conversation.
My reaction when I went to the protests in Billings was this, is that I think we all want to see justice for George Floyd. Clearly wrong, clearly atrocious when watching that video and what happened there. And now there's bipartisan talks about delivering law enforcement reform. Tim Scott, the Republican senator from South Carolina who happens to be black, is leading those efforts on Capitol Hill for the Republicans. President Trump met with black leaders yesterday. He's already delivered on criminal justice reform. But my take was kind of this, is that, hey, we all want to see justice for George Floyd, but I felt like even more folks would have attended some of these protests or rallies, whatever you want to call them, if it truly was about justice for George Floyd. All too often, it seems to me that some of these protests end up taking on an anti-police and anti-law enforcement flair, and they're trying to broadly discriminate against all police. I'm not saying you in this instance, but I'm just saying it comes off as a defund the police, cops are bad type of a protest. And I think people want to see justice for George Floyd, but they also don't want to broadly discriminate against all who wear blue. Right.
And I can agree with that to an extent. You can't fight hate with hate. And, saying that all cops are bad cops is, it's not realistic. However, if bad cops are getting away with things because good cops won't say anything, then what do we do? I think we do need cops, obviously, but things need to change in this country as a whole. And, these Black Lives Matter movements and these people, people of color taking a stand, it needs to be so much more than just the police. This is a country. This is a nationwide issue. This is not just police. It's a systematic issue. So, no, I think, they shouldn't. I don't know. I can't speak for other people in their protests, but I can tell you about the ones that we are doing here. This is about people of color. This isn't about, discriminating against the police and what they do. One of the issues with what we were doing, somebody said that we were trampling the flag, and I will be the first to tell you that if I saw something like that, I would have stand up and said something. If I can look that man in the eyes, I can look little kids in the eyes and tell them not to disrespect the flag.
Yeah, well said there. So has he reached out to apologize to you? Because I've got to think that I don't know what this guy's background is, what happened leading up to all this, but has he reached out to apologize or anything like that?
Sort of. He, through the police chief, Police Dial, which I found out through an interview, has said he would reach out to me to sit down and talk, and I responded with, when he's ready to tell the truth, I would love to sit down with him. But until that is done, I'm not going to take a half apology.
And so when you say tell the truth, because you've been seeing or hearing some things online where
yeah, like I said, there was some rumors online that the flag was being trampled and things like that, and that just isn't true. The day before that man showed up, a protester was holding the flag upside down to suggest a state of emergency, and that wasn't received well by the public, and we understood that. And the next day, when we went to two people went to this woman and asked her to put the flag away so that people could see what we were doing, because without that, with the flag in the way, that's all people saw. And so that flag was put away, and it was not used during the day that man showed up, and it has not been brought out ever since.
what else do you want to say? Or maybe, one of the questions I had is, what would you tell, if that man truly wanted to apologize, what would you tell him? What would your message be?
My message to him would be, I forgive you, and I hold no hate in my heart towards you. I hope that this moment changes him as much as it's changed me. We are capable of change as human beings. It's really hard. It's easy to get stuck in our ways and to think that life has to stay a certain way. But if we have the tough conversations and we can look people in the eyes and really express ourselves, because I'm sure that he's got plenty he'd like to say to me and wants me to understand about why he was upset, and I would love to listen. But I want to listen when it comes from a place of honesty and respect. And right now I don't have that from him. So...
a couple minutes to go here. What about the broader conversation of race and racism? I know you've mainly lived in the Flathead, but you have lived in other parts of the country. I've lived in other parts of the country as well. I don't, and I've heard this from a lot of my friends here in Montana. Look, I, as a white guy in Montana, I truly cannot know what it's like to be black and experience racism and discrimination. Now, because I've lived in other parts of the country, I feel like I've seen it. I've certainly felt racism directed towards me. I've seen discrimination. I've seen black on black discrimination. I've seen black on white discrimination, and vice versa. I feel like it's better here in Montana, but I still think we can make some improvements. What's your take?
It's different here in Montana because it's still here. You just don't see it if you're not around people of color. It's an ignorant thing to an extent, and I would say the conversations just need to be had. If you're curious, reach out. Obviously, my face is everywhere right now, and I want to have these conversations. I have a group of people we're working together to start a group that where we have answers, where we can sit down and honestly be real with you, honestly hear you. I don't want to fight back and forth. Sometimes you have to agree to disagree and be comfortable with not seeing things the same way. However, there is a difference between right and wrong. And we need to sit down and get comfortable with being uncomfortable and talking about race issues